Good morning. Good to be here with you again. This morning, we have a good lesson. Is that arrogant for me to say? Well, I don't know. It depends. But in this case, I'm going to say no because this lesson is taken from my grandfather, Eccl. So, if you're calling it a bad lesson, you can take it up with him, not with me. Although he really just did the very basic outline of these 10 kind of questions that we'll look through, and then I'm going to give my piece with each of them and tie it into Scripture, of course, as well. But this lesson has, as some more background, has been preached here before by me. And that happened over 5 years ago because I'm getting very old, and apparently all of you are too, because I've been here a really long time. But this lesson is worth preaching again, and the way that this is set up is we have a big question here. Am I the best that God has? But to answer that, we're going to go through kind of a survey of different questions, and if everybody, and this is going to be the big question, what if everyone in the church was just like me? So this is a very personal lesson. This isn't necessarily a lesson where you're going to learn a whole bunch of new things about a specific passage of Scripture, but it's a lesson to get you to think about yourself and view yourself through the lens of Scripture. And that's what we're going to try to do this morning. We're going to try to ask this question, well, what if everyone in the church was just like me? And sometimes I'll say me, and sometimes I'll say you, and try not to get offended because I'm talking about all of us. If everybody was just like me, what would this church look like? Let's go ahead and start with this first question. These first couple ones are very basic, very common ideas, and again, there's more to it than this, of course, and there's more to being a Christian than just this, but these things do apply. So we ask ourselves the question, well, what would it be like if everyone were just like me, and if so, what would the attendance of the church look like? Well, that's a good question. Now, we know the passage in Hebrews chapter 10, verses 24 and 25, and we understand that in that context, the point of the verse is not to say never miss, but instead to say don't make a habit of missing services. Why? Because there's a very important reason we come together. And the reason, or the two reasons, to stir up love and to stir up good works. That is pretty important. If we're going to meet together, there's a reason for us to meet together. We have a job to do, and that job isn't just about us either. Instead, it's for everyone that makes up the congregation. When we come together, if I'm not here, well, hopefully you'll be missing out on something because I'm not here. And if you're not here, hopefully I'll be missing out on something because you're not here. Of course, that involves us being producers in the church. It involves us actually being part of the worship service, part of the fellowship, part of what goes on, to the point that if we're not here, it causes a problem. It should, but what if everybody attended the church the same way that I do? Well, on Sunday morning, how many people would be here? I don't know. Last week, or the week before last, at least, we had 53. If it were up to me, would there be 53 people here every week, or would there be 0? I don't know. Well, what about on Sunday night, and what about on Wednesday night? Would anybody be here? Well, I don't know, but it depends on if the church were just like you, how many people would be here each time, and how many people would be here 0% of the time. But beyond that, and again, this next point is kind of, I don't want to say it's overused, but because it is important, but the same question, except applied to our contribution. And you can do that however you want. You can do that as percentage, you can do that as how much the dollar amount is, but if everybody gave, let's say, the same percentage of income that I give, would the church be able to function? Would the church be able to keep its doors open? Would the church thrive because it had so much extra money to give to good causes? I don't know. I don't know for you how that would apply. But of course we know to give. The question is, do we give? And then if everybody gave like we do, if we are someone who sows sparingly, well, then the church is going to have a struggle to stay alive. If we are someone who sows bountifully, the church will succeed and do very well. Next question. Again, this is just kind of a survey to say, well, if everybody's like me, maybe I can look at myself and say, well, if everybody were just like me, is that a good thing or is that a bad thing? And these questions help us to answer that. But what about in terms of unity? In Romans chapter 12, the whole chapter is kind of about how we work together as a church. In verse 16, it says, "Be of the same mind toward one another. Do not set your mind on high things, but associate with the humble." And a few other things that finish out that. Down to verse 18, it says, "If it is possible, as much as depends on you, live peaceably with all men." So the question is kind of twofold here. If the whole congregation were just like me, would the congregation get along? I don't know. Again, hopefully for me, I can say, I think we get along okay. But in your case, how well would we get along? How well would people get along with each other? Not just that, not just in the church. Hopefully there wouldn't be a split if everybody were just like me. But on the other hand, outside of the building, if everyone were just like me, how united would I be with other Christians? How often would I be with other Christians outside of these four walls here? How often would that happen? I don't know. But the question is for each of us individually. So if it's up to us individually, do we live peaceably with all men or not? And if it's up to us, do we even associate with other Christians or maybe not? Next question. This one actually I think hits home a little bit more, or should. The question is, who would teach the lost? If everyone in the congregation were just like me, who would teach the lost? Or would they be taught? Matthew chapter 28, we know this passage from the Great Commission. We are told to go and make disciples of all nations. We baptize them. We baptize them into the whole of the Trinity, and we teach them to do the things that Jesus has commanded. Okay? Well, if everybody is following out and carrying out that command just like I am, is that a good thing or is that bad? And if everybody follows through on this command the same way that I do, is the gospel going to be spread? Here's a scary question for me, at least. If everybody carries out the Great Commission the same way that I do, is there going to be another baptism here in the next 10 years? Ever? If it's up to me, and it's only what I'm doing, who's getting saved? Is anyone going to get saved as a result of what I'm doing? And if everybody's just like me, is anybody going to get saved? So you can apply that on the local church level or even bigger than that. And you can say, well, how much is the church going to grow if I'm the one who is having all this impact? Of course, it's a lot easier when there are 53 people or there's 60 people. It's easier to say, okay, well, let me just kind of fade into the wallpaper here, and maybe I don't have to do anything necessarily, because somebody else will take care of this. Somebody else will take care of saving the lost and making sure that people are in harmony and united with each other, and other people take care of the giving. Other people will do that. But if everybody was just like me, what would happen? Next question. Who would visit those who are in need? Well, that's a good question. If somebody has a funeral of a loved one, is there going to be anybody here or anybody there from the church if everybody's just like me? If someone's sick in the hospital, are they going to see a friendly face of someone that they know from the congregation? Well, if it's up to me, I don't know. If it's up to you, is that going to happen? If someone is a shut-in, if they're elderly, if they can't get out, is anybody going to go and see them just to brighten their day? Well, if everybody's just like me, what's going to happen? More questions. Same thing we can apply in the way that we plan for the future of the church, the vision that we have for the church, the willingness that we have to make a plan and stick to it and add to the success of the church. In Proverbs 21, verse 5, it says, the plans of the diligent lead to plenty. And good plans lead to good things, but those of everyone who is hasty, they lead to poverty. So if you plan, good things can happen, but if it's up to me, if everyone in the church is just like you, where will the church be in 5 years? Has the church planned out for 5 years if it's just you? Do they know where the church will be in 10 years? Or do they think, well, I'm just going to keep coming to church and let everybody else do everything for me, and that'll be all right, and hopefully things will be fine, in spite of me not doing anything? And that's the question for the vision of the church is, does the church fail because of my vision, or does the church succeed because I'm willing to be a part of that? And would there be any plans at all? So, same idea, different question. Another question. What if everybody served the way that I do? What if everybody in their daily lives was just like me? Not just on Sunday, not just on Wednesday, but what if everybody just acted the same as I do? What if everybody in the church acted the same way that you do every day of the week? What would get done? Ephesians chapter 5, verse 1, therefore be imitators of God as dear children. Do we imitate Christ in our daily life? Do we use him as the example of what we do each day? I wonder, and this one steps on some toes, I wonder how many hours of Netflix Jesus watched every day. I wonder how many ball games Jesus went to every day. Well, I wonder how many football games Jesus watched each Saturday. If he spent all day doing that. But I wonder what Jesus did when it wasn't the Sabbath. Well, what do we do? And not just what do we do in general, what if everybody did exactly what you do? How much time would be spent serving God if everybody lived their life just like you do? Would it be an improvement to the church? Would there be more people serving God more of the time? Or would it be worse than it is now? And that's the same question that we have to ask for each of us. Next question, and this one also is a little bit scary to me, but if the church had your study habits, then would any studying happen? And there's a reason this is scary, because there are two levels to study. It is a good thing to study the Bible. It's a great thing to study the Bible on your own just because you are doing that and because you want to gain knowledge and wisdom from Scripture. But the secondary level of studying is you study to where you can teach other people the things that you have learned. So, if I'm asking the question, if everybody in the church studied as much as I do, well, if I don't study, then who in the church is going to be able to teach a Bible class, whether to adults or to children? And who in the church is going to be able to preach if everybody only studies as much as I do? And who in the church is going to be able to teach or to study with someone who's lost that wants to be saved? If everybody has that level of Bible knowledge and that level of study, will anybody be able to be saved? Or will we not have the answers to teach them? Will anybody hear the word, or will we not have the knowledge to preach it? So, same question, same difficulty. Do we give attention to reading, to exhortation, and to doctrine? Next question. This is actually the second to last question. These go kind of quickly, but hopefully they make a good point. What if everyone took up the cross as I do? Now that's a metaphor of sorts to say that we take on the responsibility of Christ and of his mission. So how willing am I to do that? And how much am I willing to bear that cross? In Matthew chapter 16, verse 24, where we get this idea, Jesus says to his disciples, if anyone desires to come after me, as in to follow me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. So if everybody takes up the responsibility of being a disciple of Christ to the same level that I do, is that going to work out very well? Is the church going to be better off for it? If everybody takes up their cross the same way that I do, whose will is going to get done? Is it going to be Christ's will, or is it going to be my will? That goes back to the amount of time I spend on things too, but if everybody is the same as me, whose will is getting done? And does the church grow, or does the church just kind of give up? Because some people in here, it is quite obvious from the way that they live that they have taken up the cross and they are willing to carry it as far as Christ desires them to do. And it is also just as obvious that there are people in here that have not even taken up the cross in the first place, or they took it up and they kind of threw it aside as soon as they did. In whichever situation you're in, the question still stands. If everybody in the congregation were just like you, is that good or is that bad? Last question. If you've ever heard my granddad preach, you've probably heard this before because he likes to use this point, and for good reason, because it makes a good point. I'm going to make a farther point with it than just the surface level after this. But in Matthew chapter 25, verse 21, in the parable of the talents, it says, "His Lord said to him, 'Well done, good and faithful servant. You were faithful over a few things. I will make you ruler over many things. Enter into the joy of your Lord.'" In the context of the parable of the talents, of course, the faithful servant has been left some money, and he's done pretty well with it. He's doubled the money, and Jesus says, "All right, you did good. I'm going to give you even more responsibility after this point, because you've taken what I've given you, you've improved upon it." So the question is, what if I improve 10% over the next year? So from this October to next October, am I going to improve in some area that we've talked about? Am I going to improve myself as a Christian by just 10%? That's not a whole lot. We're not saying 200%. We're just saying, can I improve myself just a little bit? Can I be a tenth better than I was a year ago? And again, you can pick any category for this. You can say, well, I want to be 10% better in the amount of Bible knowledge that I have. Is that possible over the course of a year? Yep, it is. Is it possible that I could spend 10% more time on what God would want me to do rather than what I want to do? Yeah, that's possible. Most of us don't even spend 10% of our time on what God would have us to do, so that should be pretty easy to add another 10%. Could I spend 10% more time than I did this year in prayer? Yeah, I can do that too. What about evangelism? Sure. What about showing more love to others? What about being more patient, being more forgiving, being more kind, being more faithful? Can I do that? Sure. So if everybody improves this year as much as I do this year, is that a good thing or is that bad? I think some years people have negative years and they go back, they lose some of the things that they were doing as Christians the previous year. But if everybody got 10% better, what happens? Well, that's the other fun thing about this. If you go to the complicated subject of math, then if I improve by 10% this year, then that is a 10% increase. But what if 60 people improve by 10% this coming year? So everybody in here only got 10% better, but what happens collectively? Did the church get 10% better? Sort of. But if you put it all together, how much better are we? We're 600% better. Does that make a difference if this church is 600% more loving? Yeah. If they're 600% more faithful to Christ, if they give 600% more of their ability, of their money, of their time, does that make a difference? I hope so. Now here's the question. Well, like I said, I preached this lesson before. When was that? Well, according to the paper, it was 7/10/16. July of 2016. Which means that we had 5 years, not just 1 year to improve. Well, what if every year since 2016 I'd said, I want to grow by 10%. How much better am I now? I'm 50% better of a Christian. Well, I don't know what happened over the last 10 years. I don't know what you can say for yourself on your improvement as a Christian. But I do know that you might just have 5 more years ahead of you. And if you do, where are you going to be when that ends? I can almost guarantee you, if I'm still alive and if I remember, I'll preach this lesson again in 5 years. So if you feel kind of bad right now, just think what it'll feel like 5 years from now. So 10%, just a little bit over time. And that question all comes back to the original question of the lesson, which is not just that secondary question, if everybody was like me, but the big question, am I the best that God has? And this lesson isn't intended for you to feel guilty, although I feel kind of guilty, but it's intended for us to recognize there's plenty of room for us to grow. And there's plenty that we can do on an individual level and need to do on an individual level in order to grow. Am I the best that God has? Are you the best that God has? I don't know. If you improve just a little bit every year, even if you can't say, maybe I'm not the best God has, but I'm trying to be better. Well, is that true for you? I don't know. Would you, as a secondary question here, would you want people to imitate you? That's what we've been asking the whole time. We've been saying, would it be good if everyone were like you? What that question really is am I faithful enough to God that I want people to look up to me and act the way that I do? Would they be improved by doing that, or would they be worse for it? So am I somebody that I want others to imitate? And then maybe this question too. Am I the kind of Christian that I want other Christians to be? I know that's similar, but what that does for me at least is to say, well, if I look at somebody else and I say, well, look at this area that they have a problem with, or look at this issue that they have in being a Christian, am I the kind of person, the kind of Christian that I should be? I mean, sure, maybe they have an issue over here, but where could I improve? And the question, of course, still is, am I the best that I can be for God? I don't know what the answer to that is for you. I hope that answer is better than it was 5 years ago, but if it's not, you can still make a change. It's not too late until it's all over. So this morning, if there's anything we can help you to do to improve as a Christian, then this is a great opportunity to take that opportunity. And there are things, they're not terribly complicated, they just take effort, but there are things that we can do and that you can do to help yourself be more like Christ and be someone that's more useful in God's kingdom. This morning, if there's anything we can help you with, especially coming to God for the first time, this is your opportunity while we stand and while we sing.